If you think of a sports team, high performing sports teams, take a high performing team in the NBA, they do not train hard, full out every single training practice in every single game. Because if they did that, they would be exhausted physically and mentally, and they wouldn't be winning games. And that wouldn't make the owners of the teams very happy or the fans. Good teams have performance cycles. They have periods of intensity, periods of recovery in order to be their best at a game. We try to apply those principles a little bit more consistently to the workforce. We can help people manage so that when they have those times of intensity, they have periods of recovery that allow them to regroup, build that resiliency, build that adaptability, and get ready for the next thing.
Welcome to Change Leadership Conversations, where we dive into what it takes to lead change in today's disruptive and fast-paced world. I'm Yvonne Ruke, Akpoveta, the founder of the Change Leadership. We create change leadership workshops, content, courses, and community. In this episode, I'm joined by Elizabeth McSavaney, a senior HR executive with over 25 years of experience driving transformation across sectors like insurance, tech, and government. Hi, everybody. Excited to have with me Liz McSavaney. What I love about your background, Elizabeth, is looking at it, you were actually a professor as well.
I was. I sometimes forget that I did that, but yes.
And now you are head of HR for Zurich Canada and leader of HR transformation for North America, guiding people through workforce planning, leadership development, and future-focused HR. I want to talk about what future-focused HR looks like. There's just so much you've done, and I look forward to discussing all of this and getting our viewers to see behind the lens. So how did you get to where it is that you are now, and what does it look like leading change in today's disruptive business environment? You can say disruptive, and before the end of saying the word, it's all disrupted again. You
True.
have such an impressive career leading transformation. You've done change management, you've done HR, you've done it in insurance, you've done it in tech, you've done it in government. How did your journey into change management and HR really begin? Was it one of those things you said, I want to go into HR, I want to go into change management?
No, I have a background as a competitive athlete and a coach. I did my undergraduate degree in kinesiology, and I thought sort of sport was the place that I was going to go in. But I think if I think about it, and I really have that sort of hindsight is 2020, my thoughts around people and performance really sort of put me into a place where I've been curious about how people respond under pressure, how mindset impacts performance, and how coaching can unlock potential. And there's a real connection between people and performance that I think I could say I fell into HR, but if I really think about it, it was naturally drawn to me. And that change element, when you think about change, and all the experiences that I've had, being able to help teams perform better, whether it's through clarity, through shaping culture, through helping leaders on their journey, that really speaks to my background and that mindset and coaching aspect. So I do think that it's about unlocking performance and potential, which really rings true to how I sort of grew up, and I thought that that's where I was going to go, and I think I got there just in a very different way.
I like that you say it's about performance and people. And you talk about coaching, and when we think about the athletic world and folks who do those kind of things, they're often under pressure,
Mhm.
especially when there's competition. There is that intense pressure. And when we look at today's environment, there is intense pressure. How would you relate the two to that type of performance, like training under pressure? Because in the workplace right now, it's literally training under pressure. One minute you feel this is the direction it is that we're going, and then the next minute we have to pivot and constant pressure. How do you relate the two?
We used to talk about change being having a beginning and an end, and now to your point, it's just a constant thing. I used to say many years ago that change is the new normal, and I think it just is. Change is the way that we are today. But to me, the same principles I would apply from an athletic perspective apply to the workforce, and it's about shifting to resilience and adaptability, because change is
Mm.
always going to be there. If the pandemic taught us nothing, the world is not what we thought it would be, and the trajectory is not what we thought it to be. But I feel people that are successful in navigating change, both from an employee perspective or even a leadership perspective, have that resiliency and adaptability. And it's about preparing people for what's next and not just about what is happening to them right now. And really creating those strategies within your culture and helping to build that so that people don't feel they're always going to feel the overwhelm and the anxiety because there's a lot coming at us at any given time. And if you think about the world today, with all the change that we've had, the geopolitical tensions,
Mm.
the influx of AI, but if you have that ability to be resilient, if you have the ability to adapt, if you have the ability to pivot, you can do that no matter what life throws at you. The analogy I think of when you talk about that, if you, I'll always go back to sport. If you think of a sports team, high performing sports teams, take a high performing team in the NBA, they do not train hard, full out every single training practice in every single game. Because if they did that, they would be exhausted physically and mentally, and they wouldn't be winning games. And that wouldn't make the owners of the teams very happy or the fans. Good teams have performance cycles. They have periods of intensity, periods of recovery in order to be their best at a game. We try to apply those principles a little bit more consistently to the workforce. We can help people manage so that when they have those times of intensity, they have periods of recovery that allow them to regroup, build that resiliency, build that adaptability, and get ready for the next thing.
It's interesting you say that, and you used an analogy which was great. You said there's the cycle, the periods of recovery and the periods of intensity. Right now, everything feels very intense
Mhm.
as a leader and somebody who leads people and is in charge of people in an organization. What are those kind of things that you would advocate for so that the pressure doesn't always seem intense?
First of all, in all the research and all the documentation, a lot of transformation in organizations doesn't fail because you didn't invest in the right technology or you didn't invest in the right tools. It often fails because of lack of leadership. And in my experience, you need to deliver that change from the top down. So you
Mhm.
need to have leaders that really buy into the change, understand the change, and then be authentic about how they're going to communicate the change and help their teams navigate. Being open and honest about the things that you know, the things that you don't know, staying true to your word, help to build the trust with your people so that when change is happening, oftentimes people get very anxious about change. And I find the further people are removed from decision of control or the point of control, the locus of control, there's more anxiety because they don't know all the pieces. And leaders really play a key role in helping to articulate the vision, articulate the strategy, and really help people understand how to navigate and what to do during those periods of change and giving them the tools that they need, whether that's having great wellness programs and mental resiliency in the workplace, or just really helping them manage their priorities and stay focused on the end goal. What are we trying to accomplish? I think that to me builds authentic trust within the organization if people are communicating openly and honestly and not always thinking that as a leader I need to have all the answers and I need to have perfection, because oftentimes in those cases I will see leaders in the absence of having all the answers themselves will sometimes decide not to communicate.
Yes, I was about to get to that. How
Yeah.
do we overcome that? Because I've seen it several times where they hold back information. And you just said very rightly that when people feel further away from the decision or what's going on, the more fearful they may be, the more uncertain they may be, the more anxious they may be. Often the times I've experienced trying to help leaders understand that people want that information, even if it's just a little information to say, this is all I have, this is all I know, this is what's coming. And they still struggle with doing that.
Mhm.
So, in your experience, what's been the best approach in helping leaders understand that you need to carry people along from the beginning, help them understand what's happening, help them feel involved, help them feel engaged, help them feel less anxious?
The first big thing is it comes to strategy and planning. Any big transformation that I've been a part of or led has always started with a really good plan. Do we as leaders know where we're trying to go? And that might sound silly and simple, but it's often a piece that's overlooked. If you overlook that, you just headstrong into change. You start going, you start moving, and nobody knows what direction we're going in. And that builds a lot of the anxiousness and the mistrust. I think to a big transformation I had over the course of my career where as a leadership team, first of all, we were all very connected on what is it we're trying to accomplish with this change. And we set out on a regular basis to plan and iterate and think through everything that that meant. And we had everybody from the organization involved in this planning process because it touched everyone. It touched the
Mm.
business, it touched the functions, and trying to think through all of the angles that could play out, all of the questions that could come up. So having a strong strategy and plan of what is that North Star? What are we trying to accomplish with this change? Building in then how are we going to communicate this to the employees? And when you go about communicating that to the employees, you have to be consistent. You have to be as honest as you can be, and you have to be about what you say you're going to do. Having a communication plan needs to be really well thought out, and then you have to have a cadence at which you're going to communicate that change and transformation to the employees, and you have to stay on that target. If you say you're going to deliver something by X date, you need to deliver it. And if you can't deliver it, you need to then come out in front of that and say, we said we were going to deliver on this date. We can't deliver it because of these reasons, but we're going to, come back to you with when we can let you know when we're going to deliver it.
Yes.
Being able to do that creates a trust that cannot be underestimated because in the absence of trust, in my experience, people make up the most amazing stories about what they perceive to be the truth, and they will completely derail your change. They might derail your business. They might cause a lack of employee engagement, turnover, attrition, all that good stuff. And it's just such a simple principle to be really structured in your plan and be structured about your communication and make sure that you found ways throughout that change process to engage people where you can. It's not always possible. I've worked on change plans that have to be very hush hush, very secretive for reasons because they have big implications. But we've always found pockets of opportunity, even if it's after the announcement, to engage employees in some of that conversation or decision making. And that then helps to bring people along versus pull them in the direction that you want them to go.
I really, really like where you said engage people because I wanted to find that balance right now between building a plan without engaging people and engaging people to build a plan. One of the challenges for people building out the change management plan, you will find that they go into an organization or they start off on a project, whether as an external consultant or they are internal. And the first thing they ask is build a change management plan. And they haven't even engaged the employees. They haven't even done a change impacts assessment. Where's that balance between the plan versus some type of engagement and assessment to help pull out that information to build the plan?
I think that's a great question. And actually, it's how I got one of my roles because a senior change person was hired on a consultancy basis to run a project we were doing in the US. And they came in with all the great knowledge and expertise, Yvonne, in terms of what the protocols are and how we're going to do this analysis. And their contract was quickly terminated. And the reason it was terminated is because they failed to understand the application to the business. And I think whether you're coming from the outside as a change manager for a project or you're being asked to do this internally, you need to understand the business.
Mm.
You need to understand what business are we in, because every principle, every best practice does not play out the same way in every organization because you
Mm-hmm.
have different strategies, different customers, different people, different cultures. Even in the times where the change has to be kept, very high level and very secretive, there are still opportunities for you to make sure that you understand through talking to the people that you can talk to, through reading the things that you can read through, maybe even by quiet observation. What is the pulse of the organization? What is the position that we're starting from? And how can that apply to the change? The more secretive a change process has to be managed, better it would be for then those folks planning the change to think in our change management plan, in our strategy and execution, where will there be those pivotal points to engage people from the business?
Yes.
Where would that make sense? If we can't do it up front, where are the milestones within the project that we can engage?
Yeah, to go
I
back
think
and
that's,
validate,
yeah,
you know,
exactly.
because sometimes you may be running with observations, you may be running with what you know to be true, and sometimes it's assumptions that you're running with.
Mhm.
And often at times when you're within a project or change initiative, you have all of the information. So you don't have that anxiety around the change. And you may just say, oh, yes, if we do this, it should be okay. And you're assuming, and you're not applying some level of empathy to how people may be experiencing it that are just hearing it for the first time, because you might think, oh, it's not that big, and to somebody else, it may just be big. This takes me into one of my favorite things that I love to say: change is changing.
Yep, I
The
like that.
change is changing. The way we lead change is changing. The type of changes we're experiencing are changing. The pace of change is changing. There is just so much going on when it comes to change. Everywhere you turn, the word change is happening. Over the years, how have you seen how we lead and manage change evolve?
It's a really interesting question. I think I go back to something I said earlier. Change used to be sort of that project centered approach. We had very clear start and end dates. And now, because it is just something that constantly happens to us, leadership really needs to pivot to sort of this values of agility. And I come back to that resilience, but agility is very, very important as leaders. You often hear that sort of fail fast, learn quickly, because there's always going to be something that's coming next. And so leaders, their skill set is constantly evolving. Their ability to navigate change is constantly evolving in order for them to better help their folks through the change and transformation. But the agility piece, I think, is where people quickly understand whether or not something's working and what do they need to do to fix it and change and iterate to do the next thing. Where change has often fallen off is where leaders are very entrenched in, no, we set the strategy, we said this is the way that we were going to
Mm,
do it, we're going to keep going. And they fail to recognize or even see around them that maybe the dynamics have changed, maybe something external has changed, maybe something internally has changed. And if you don't have that agility, if you don't have the ability to stop and reevaluate where you're at, you can't change the course and your change will fail.
mm,
And so I really think that's very important for them to be able to do. And that will then help their people understand that they too need to have that same skill set, because change management, it's not just the leader's responsibility, it's not just HR's responsibility, it's everyone's responsibility. And you also want to make sure that you've empowered the people on your team to also have that agility so that they might be able to see things that maybe you can't see as a leader because you're too far from it. But then they have the safety within the team or the freedom or the empowerment within the team to speak up and help you pivot when you can't see it yourself.
mm. I want to pick up on the few points. There was the point you made about whose responsibility. When we think about change historically, we have the change managers. You mentioned we have project management and it's part of a project, or you have the leader who is responsible for it. Still on that question of how it's evolving and what you're seeing in organizations where you've led change, how is the role evolving for people within organization? Whose responsibility is it to lead change?
It's everyone's responsibility to lead change. And what I'm seeing is some organizations, not all, but some are getting away from having a change management discipline or COE because they don't want it to become a bureaucratic process or an institutionalized process. You want to have a balance of just the right level of expertise, because there are some key principles and core tenets to good change management that someone needs to be able to help educate and guide and lead leaders and employees through. The more a culture can say to everyone, change is all part of our responsibility. Change is something we all need to have, that adaptability, that resiliency, that agility. Everyone becomes, whether you call them change champions or change advocates or change influencers. I've heard all sorts of different titles to that. But the more you can empower the people across your organization to embrace change, to understand the core principles of change, and to be able to lead for it in their own role, regardless of what that role looks like, the better chances you have as an organization to be much more resilient, to be much more open and adaptable to change, versus just having it become one person's core responsibility. Because then it becomes yet another principle that we have to apply, and people, they don't understand it, or they haven't bought into it, or they don't understand the role that they can play to drive it effectively.
I'm thinking here and really thinking out loud. As certain organizations putting the cart before the horse, and I'll say it like this. Some people may not understand the difference between change management and change leadership. Two different skill sets,
Mhm.
often overlapping, but they don't understand it. And then you find some organizations which are rightly saying it's everybody's responsibility to lead change. And I've seen this happen where before you go into equipping everybody to be able to lead, navigate, and respond to change, you disband the change management. And you say, oh, we don't need change management. Everybody should be responsible for leading and driving change. But what have they done, or what do they need to do to equip people with the right type of mindset, the right type of skills, and have the right type of understanding when it comes to leading change? Because when we think about change management is very tactical. You have that project, you're doing your impact analysis, you're doing the change management plan, you're doing the organizational assessment, especially if it's a large transformation project, you have that change management. Change leadership, very skills based. It's continuous in everything we do. Like you mentioned, we're navigating, we need to be agile, we need to be responsive, very skills focused. And change managers have change leadership skills. But what happens when an organization totally disbands the change management CEO, expects people to take on that responsibility in addition to their role, especially if it's a large transformation, forgetting that they have their day-to-day responsibilities and they may not have that capacity. I'll pause there for a second. What are your thoughts?
In the danger of making people feel like they've got yet another thing to do off the side of their desk. So I'm not advocating for throwing the baby out with the bathwater. There's a delicate balance between having something so structured and so sort of ivory towered that it feels like it's their responsibility to initiate the change. I've seen it where you can have a very successful COE, or you can have sort of those change leaders within different pockets of the organization. It really depends on the business and the industry, but how organizations can really build those sort of agile, change ready cultures. If I go back again, I told you everything was going to be about sport at some point. I think of it of the same way of building muscle through your experts in the business. You're building that change muscle through repetition and recovery, creating space for people for experimentation. So a lot of companies now, and even some of the community associations I see, run things like innovation competitions and case competitions where they encourage people to experiment and to fail and to learn from that failure or maybe succeed. I think if you create that space for experimentation, it allows for some risk taking, some entrepreneurialism, some ownership in that area, and it builds that skill set. You need to reward the curiosity. So oftentimes organizations will reward the success of a project, but I'm talking about rewarding the curiosity, whether it
Mm-hmm.
gets you there or not. So the fact that you tried, even if you failed, and I had a really amazing leader over the course of my career that said, failure is not failure, it's an opportunity, it's a learning opportunity, it's an opportunity that you've just learned something new. So how do we reward people for being curious?
Mm.
Whether that's through monetary awards or just peer recognition, and then really normalize the feedback that has to happen as a result of that. Because again, if you think about a really strong, resilient culture, they're not going to avoid disruption. They're going to try to anticipate it and then adapt faster than the competition. So you have to build in those practices as part of your organizational culture that are going to encourage and reward the right behaviors, and that way you don't have it to be like, I'm adding change manager to your title and now you have something else to do. I'm arming you with the skill sets and the tools in order to drive successful change. And I'm creating a culture where it becomes the way in which we are and the way in which we work, not another task or responsibility that's added to our job description.
I love that. I love you use the word culture, and that's where we need to begin, right? Building that very intentional culture. So before we say we don't need change managers, or everybody should be a change leader, or everybody should be innovative, and everybody should be able to respond better and faster to change. Have we created that culture, the people being trained, the right mindsets, the behaviors? Have we put in the systems, all those things that make our culture, and not just introduce one project and say, oh, now everybody's going to be an engineer. Now everybody's going to be a project manager. Now everybody is going to be a change leader. What have we done to help people become who they need to be
Yeah.
to, respond to change, lead change, navigate change, be better at doing change, and not make those assumptions along the way that this is easy peasy, everybody should be able to do it. This is where we want to go, and expect everybody to line up in that direction and march towards the new vision without putting the things in place to build that vision of where it is that we want to go. For you, you have HR, you've done change management. Where do you see the intersection? And maybe this is just going back to what we discussed. Have you even seen in your experience people say, oh, you're HR, you should be able to do change management?
Oftentimes, organizations will expect HR to own the communication or maybe the failure of when it doesn't work versus being part of the strategy, part of the decision-making process. Not to date myself, but I started at a time when HR in some companies was still called personnel. It was very administrative. Now I'm really dating myself.
Let's date ourselves together.
It
I
was
remember those
personnel.
times as well.
It was very much an overhead function, and really it was about, policing or cleaning things up. If you even think, I mean, we're 2025, and I would argue in some organizations it might still be the case, but I really think the biggest misconception is that we're not here to communicate it, but we're here to shape it. We need to be part of the transformation. Any successful transformation, and if I go back to an example I shared earlier where it was a concerted effort of an entire leadership team getting together, HR needs to be at the table. We need to be able to input at all phases of the planning and communication rollout in order to be able to successfully lead for it. HR has so much to offer. We understand our leaders, we understand the talent, we understand the culture, we understand the structure. There's not many functions within a company that get all the things HR sees. We see everything.
Mhm.
We see the good, the bad, the stuff that's in between, but a really good HR business partner sitting at that table can look at it from a total lens that maybe other functions don't get the liberty of seeing. And so that's why I think if HR is not at the table, it's such a big missed opportunity because, you know, at the end of the day, whether you're implementing a lot of AI tools or a lot of technology, we still have humans doing the majority of the work. And so we need to be able to be part of that so that we can engage in the right way, we can drive the right amount of change, and we can really help shape the strategy.
And how do you get to be at the table? Because whether it's HR folks or whether it's change manager folks, one of the gripes, and very valid gripes that folks have is we're never there when the decision is being made. The decision is made, and then they're like, oh, come on board and implement it without that understanding of what the impact looks like. And you're just expected to make it work. How do you get a seat at the table? That's the biggest thing everybody says, be at the table. And in this situation, it doesn't work where they say, if you don't have a seat at the table, go build your own table. You need to be at this particular table.
I need this table. This is the one that I want to be at.
Ideally, let's have somebody at the top that is really passionate, advocating for HR or advocating for change people to be at the table. How do you make it happen sometimes when you're not even being called to the table?
If you're in a leadership role in HR, it is incumbent upon you to see yourself not as an HR leader, but as a business leader. I think the biggest gripe I see from senior executives that don't see the value of HR is they see HR as a standalone functional overhead functional unit. First of all, even in the transformation we've been doing from the HR perspective, something simple is changing the words that we use, being intentional about saying we are going to enable the business through our talent is very key instead of saying we're going to build this HR strategy. In order to get the respect from the business leaders, and you see a lot of articles about this now, but it's something that I've always just sort of seen over the course of my career, and maybe because I started in smaller companies where I could hear everything and I was curious. You are a business leader. You need to understand the business. You need to understand the market that you're operating in. What is it that you're selling, making, manufacturing? What knowledge space are you in? How does your organization make money, lose money? What are the risks that are associated with the business that you're in? What are some of the pieces that keep your colleagues up at night? What are the things that they're worried about? You need to understand those the way a business leader understands, and then you need the superpower of being able to apply that to the people lens. So, what is it that we need to do from a human capability perspective in order to enable the business to achieve those
Yeah.
objectives? Unfortunately, I think a lot of folks in HR have sort of shied away from that, maybe because they're like, "Well, I don't understand the financial piece, or I'm nervous about, I don't understand marketing and communications or sales." You don't have to be an expert in all of those things. And, I would argue people have tools today that we didn't have when we were starting out, even something simple as ChatGPT to ask questions. What is this about? What should I care about? You can create agents that give you weekly status updates of your industry, what things that you should think about as an HR leader. But if you don't learn to understand the business and speak the language, you're never going to have that credibility. And if you can have that credibility, you build that trust, you start talking like they do, you start putting things in words that they understand, it will enable you to be successful, not only to get the trust and the respect that HR really deserves, to get that coveted seat at the table, but
Mm.
more importantly, if you've got the trust and the buy-in and the implications of cost, when you go to get that investment in a technology solution, a people solution, or a change management solution, you have a much higher chance of getting no pushback on that, or very little, because you've got the buy-in from the business, because they trust you and they trust that you understand the business that we're in. I heard a comment once from an executive when we were trying to figure out what the disconnect between HR and the business was, and the comment could be said of any industry, but if you're in an industry such as in the trucking industry, if your senior leadership team says HR thinks that they're in the HR industry and they don't understand they're an HR team within a trucking industry, that's the problem. You need to understand that you're there to enable the company to achieve its objectives. You're not there because you're in the business of HR.
Yeah, there's so many things you said there that we could unpack. And it all comes down to influence, right? When you stop seeing yourself as a function and you start seeing yourself as more results driven and outcome driven and value driven, as in
Mhm.
what value am I bringing, as opposed to say, I'm a function, I just do HR and this is what HR is. And one of the things that was coming to mind when you were speaking was moving from HR or even change management or whatever it is we do, or even project management, whatever that role is, when we stop seeing ourselves as implemented, we're serving. The business brings in the ideas and we implement. But when we start to see ourselves as those strategic partners, and not even see ourselves as a functional strategic partner, I love the word you use, where as a business strategic
Mhm.
partner, you're thinking holistically about what the impact is. You're able to speak the language of the finance person. You're able to speak the language of the risk management team. You're able to speak to what their needs are. And let's call a spade a spade. If you bring value in any way, everybody wants you at the table.
Yeah, agree.
They will say every time we have Liz at the table, every time we have Yvonne at the table, every time we have Sharon at the table, she brings in so much value. Every time Peter inputs into our strategy plan, we see so much value. So let's make sure we have them at the table, to the extent whereby they'll reschedule a meeting if you're not available.
Yeah. That's how you know you've really arrived, Yvonne.
Exactly. It starts with the quick wins, right? When you
Yeah.
start to demonstrate value, the more they just want you to be at the table. You mentioned something. I have to see how you're approaching it generally yourself and even as an organization, and what you're seeing in the HR industry as a whole with the challenge of AI and generative AI.
Mm.
And you mentioned Chat GPT, we can use that. What are some of the challenges you see around the Chat GPTs and the Geminis and the whole generative AI? And not just the challenges, the beauty of it as well, because there is so much beauty in it. Because I'm sure you've been at tables to say, what do we do with AI in our organization? So what's holding it back and what's driving it forward?
Listen, I think fear is a big driver. Again, date myself. But the advent of all the things of the World Wide Web and the
Mm.
fear that that brought, but in reality, it really became a tool. One could argue it's enhanced our work, but also tethered us a bit more to our work. I think the fear of it, and I always try to use a phrase that I've heard spoken many times in many different circles when people are scared that AI is going to replace them. And let's face it, AI is accelerating at a pace that we've never seen before. The quote that I keep going back to for folks is you're not going to be replaced by AI, but you're going to be replaced by someone who knows how to use it. We have a lot of data, we have artificial intelligence tools, and it's been around for much longer than people really realize.
Yeah.
To me, it's not about replacing, it's about elevating. There's a common phrase when we're talking about large language models and AI of that human in the loop. For me, AI is about how can it make some of the work that I need to get done much more effective, much more efficient, so that it frees me up to do the stuff that humans are far more capable at doing than machines could ever do. Whether it's reasoning, it's applying judgment, it's applying concepts that a tool will not quite understand. I've tried to instill this in my team of let's use the tools so that they can benefit us, as they can free up some of your time so that you can really focus on having that strategic conversation with a leader around their talent strategy or talking through a new project that somebody wants to do. The thing that people also worry about is not maybe so much the technology, but it's the pace of change and people's ability to absorb it as quickly as it's happening. So you have to really balance the speed with sustainability because, we know transformation burnout is a thing and people are feeling it. It's the fear of the unknown. And the last thing I will say in a lot of industries, mine included, some of the reluctance towards AI, although we're already using it in the insurance world, but it's risk. There's still a lot of risk around it. And so companies are moving very quickly to try to build the right ring fences around it to make sure that whatever data they're using is protected and that employees understand the right ways to use it and the dangers of using it, the risks that are associated with it. Those are the things that tend to hold people back. But if you don't use it, you're going to be replaced by somebody who does, whether it's an individual that's doing it or a company that's doing it faster than you. And so it's incumbent upon leaders to really figure it out quickly and help their people do the same.
So let's flip the script a little bit. Employees, the pace of change, the change fatigue, the speed versus the sustainability, and you as a leader bringing people on board. We've spoken about the risk. You mentioned that there's that data risk, and the organization has to be sure that this is the right thing for us as an organization in line with our policies, governance, and privacy, and all of that. How do you, as a senior leader, influence other leaders to come on board to say, let's do AI or let's look at this change? Because I know of some organizations where the organization has said, yay, go ahead, let's do AI. They've introduced AI into the organization. The team wants AI. They're happy to use AI because it's going to make their lives much easier. But their leader at the senior level is like, no, we don't need this. We don't need to use it, doesn't believe in it, and has a different mindset. How does somebody who is reporting into that kind of leader, what do they do? Or how do you, as a change leader across board who is bringing transformation into the organization scenario, maybe that somebody from that team comes to you, to HR, to say, this is my challenge. I want to use AI. And my leader is saying, no, we can't use AI.
The principles you would apply in any change management or transformation approach are very similar. You start with why. Why are you fearful? What's your reluctance? So if you understand where that person, or try to understand, sometimes they're not always going to be honest about it, but what is your reluctance to using it? What are your concerns? Is it a risk? Is it a lack of knowledge? Is it something else? And try as best as you can to try to alleviate some of those concerns or address some of those concerns and work through that with them. Sometimes that will be just enough that you need. If you're saying, Liz, I'm very concerned about the kind of data that I put in there and how the data is going to be used. So, is there an opportunity to explain to them show them the policy of how we're trying to advise employees on what information to put in there, talk about the guardrails that the organization has put in place. Is there a gap that we're missing? Do we need to do something else? And if you're still kind of needing that extra little push, I will tell you with senior leaders, FOMO is a real thing and they're very competitive. So, what I have found is this human behavior in general. If you have opportunities in an open forum with other leaders where you talk about something really cool that you just did using ChatGPT or AI tools on our underwriting our claims, if you can show I did this. This is what I did. This is how really interesting it was. This is the time it saved me. This was the money it saved me. This is the engagement I got from my team because now they don't have to comb through mountains of data that takes hours. They can have AI do that in seconds, and then they can apply their judgment, their expertise, and their knowledge to what the data is telling them and validate, and then get back to a customer and then drive, in our case, retention or new business. That also might be the catalyst for them to pay attention to it.
I love that because you're speaking to their why. You're treating them as humans. One
Yes,
thing people forget is that leaders are also humans. Senior leaders are also humans.
so true.
And it's often, oh, yes, they'll get on board. Oh, yes, they'll do this. And yes, as leaders, there is that certain level of expectation, but let's never forget that they're also humans. We have to humanize them as well and go back to understanding the why behind why don't you want to use this? What's holding you back? What's your challenge? And you also said something I love so much in change management. If you want to get buy-in, what's in it for me?
Yeah.
When you go in there and you start talking about productivity and you start talking about money and you start talking about effectiveness, because when you're a senior leader, the budget, the bottom line, and when you start
Yeah.
speaking their language, they start to say, okay, if this is going to help my bottom line, maybe I need to be using it as well. But you raised so many great points there. Oh my gosh, we could go on and on and on. Right now, we are in what you'd call a vocal world. There's the volatility, there's the
Yeah.
uncertainty, there's a complexity, ambiguity. All of that is constantly happening around us. When you look at all of those things, and as a HR leader, as somebody who is also leading HR transformation across your organization and leading transformations as a whole, not just even HR transformation, because HR transformation is not singular, it's about supporting the overall organizational
Mhm.
transformation. With everything happening, social, economic issues, geopolitical issues, what keeps you up at night?
Oh, so many things. Um, for me, it's the pace of change and people's ability to absorb it because it is moving so quickly. It feels overwhelming for folks because they feel like I just got through the pandemic and now
Yeah,
I've got AI and now I've got geopolitical and a lot of this stuff is outside their locus of control. In fact, most of it is. When I think about how can we balance the need for information as leaders, we're human as well, so we also need to make sure we're putting our oxygen mask on first, and
yes,
you said that very well. What information is important for my team to know? What information is it my responsibility to sort of keep at bay from them because it's not relevant to their work and it's only going to cause anxiety and anxiousness amongst my team? And then how am I helping them? Again, I go back to that ability to be adaptable, to be agile, to be resilient. I really take a vested interest in trying to instill those principles in the people that work on my team or even the people that I work with. Sometimes I feel like I take that on maybe from an empathy perspective a little too much because I feel the weight on my shoulders. And then that's when I go and exercise and do all the weightlifting that I like to do. I feel if we can give people the tools, it becomes a more sustainable model to navigate the pace of change and navigate all that's coming up. And the one thing that I will always say to my team is you need to focus on what you can control. You are the only person that you can control. You can never control if Yvonne and I are having a conversation and Yvonne feels a way about something I said and gets upset. I can't control how you feel. I can't control how you perceive what I say, but I can control how I respond and how I act in that situation and how I move going forward. And I find when you put people back into you are the center of your own universe, you're the center of your control, and you have to work on what you can work on and forget the other stuff that you don't have any control over. I find that helps to ease people's anxiety. I heard a quote the other day on the radio where it's a popular rapper that I love, Heather B. And she was saying that if you worry about something that's going to happen, it does not help you for the worry that you have tomorrow. It just disrupts the day that you're having today.
Oh, I love that.
Resonated so closely with me. And it's so true because it doesn't do anything for you in the moment. It's really focusing on what do you have in front of you and what can you control because life is short and I don't want to have any regrets.
Yeah, I'm gonna go check out who Heather B is.
A very
But
popular rapper from the 90s.
one thing you said, and I don't want us to lose that, is in a world that seems as if so much is out of our control and so much is happening at a pace that is uncontrollable, it's taking back our power.
Yes.
To say what is within my control. You may not be able to control the 100 things happening around you, but one thing you have total power over is how you respond to those situations. And I love it. That's such a great note to nearly end on. Taking your power back, is so key. And to wrap this up, if there was one thing you wanted to share with anybody that was listening right now and say, hey, remember this one thing, what would that be?
That's a really good one. If I think of the topic we're talking about, I would say change is never easy, but in my opinion, it's always human because we're the ones that are responding to it. If you lead with that clarity, the compassion, and the courage, even and especially in times that are very uncertain, you empower people and you give people that power to feel the confidence so that they can move forward. That's what real leadership looks like, in my opinion.
A reminder that we're humans. Whatever we're leading, whatever change is happening, it's being led by people and it is for people. And we're human first, even in the midst of all of this disruption. Thank you so much, Liz. It's been great having you and having this conversation. There's so many things I want to ask, and I almost feel that, yes, I need to have you back and ask all those questions again.
It's been really great discussing this. I love this topic. It's always nice to have a conversation about it.
And if our listeners wanted to connect with you, what's the best way?
I'm on LinkedIn, so I would love it if people want to reach out. I don't have all the answers. I don't have all the experience, and I love hearing from folks that have gone through similar experiences or maybe struggling through a change or a transformation. Please connect because I think we can learn from each other as a community. And us HR people need to stick together. So
we all need to stick together. Thank you for bringing so much insight on that intersection between HR and what it takes to lead change. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Change Leadership Conversations. Be sure to hit the follow button, leave us a review, and share this podcast with your team or fellow change leaders, because leading change is better when we do it together.